Good afternoon. How's everybody doing?
Good afternoon.
Come on, y'all. That's weak. That's weak. Let's go. Let's hear it. Good. Good, good, good. Well, look, I don't know about you all, but I am incredibly inspired and humbled. Over the last couple days, we've had some really empowering conversations, some really enriching conversations, and I'm incredibly honored to be in the space with these gentlemen. So thank you to Mr. Earl Butch Graves Jr., Mr. Alfred Edmond Jr., and the entire Black Enterprise team for not only inviting us, but also inviting us to have this particular conversation. So thank you to them. Please give them a round of applause. Now, so once again, my name is Jason Rosario. I am the executive director and founder of The Lives of Men, which is a social impact creative agency that is challenging and redefining and shaping modern masculinity. I'm also the executive producer and host of the Yahoo News original series called Dear Men, where we're further exploring these conversations. And before I introduce the two dynamic gentlemen that I have next to me, I want to take a moment to frame the conversation that we're going to have today, if you don't mind. But if you notice that the title of today's session is called Cry Like a Man. And that title was borrowed from a book of the same name, written by another BE modern man, Jason Wilson, who could not be here with us today. So shout out to Jason Wilson, but this is the book. And yeah, shout out to Jason. I'm sure he's watching. But this is the book, and Jason is doing incredible work in Detroit. He founded an organization called the Cave of Adullam, which essentially does work with young boys, particularly young boys of color, in helping them tap into their emotions through the power of martial arts. And his book, in particular, chronicles his story about moving from emotional incarceration, as he calls it, towards becoming a man, a comprehensive man. And what does that mean? Well, that means that as a man, we have the unique ability to not only stand in our principles and in our essence as men, but still tap into this emotional, nurturing side of ourselves that allows us to be fully comprehensive. And so when you think about that, I thought it was a perfect title and a perfect concept to ground this conversation in, right? This idea of male masculinity and what that means and how that can be the key that unlocks our abilities to live our fullest, most fulfilled lives, not only personally, but professionally. So that is the conversation that we're gonna have today. And I invite you to be engaged. This is a big room, and it's hard to make that smaller, but we're gonna try to do that today with our conversation and with our engagement. So prepare your questions. We're gonna open it up a little bit earlier than we have in the past in terms of opening up for dialogue, so please be ready. But let me introduce the gentleman that I have next to me, if you don't mind. Next to me, you already know the gentleman. I mean, 2019 BE Modern Man of the Year, Mr. Jay Barnett. He is a licensed therapist. He wrote his book, and his book called Hello King, Claim Your Throne chronicles his journey from attempting suicide to becoming an influential figure in the lives of young men. So please give him a round of applause. And Phil Roundtree, of course, a child and adolescent therapist and mental health advocate. He founded Quantify, which is a nonprofit organization that serves as a mental health resource to both individuals and organizations. So again, welcome, Phil. So I wanted to start the conversation where I left off, right, around male vulnerability. And this idea that, as it relates to vulnerability, men, we're not used to talking about our feelings. We're disconnected from our emotions. So what I wanted to do is get from you all a sense of your work, but also particularly that how in your work you've uncovered the importance in the relationship between mental health and this idea of being vulnerable as men.
Can you hear me? Good, we didn't do the mic check. So I'm privileged to be here. I'm humbled to be here today. As Jason said, you know, we're going to try to make this room small, right? And so for me, whenever I go to speak, whether it's in front of one or it's in front of 1,000, I look at it as being a safe space, right? Because I give a lot of myself, and I know these brothers will give a lot of themselves. This is so meaningful for me in that when we have this conversation about masculinity, when we talk about what Quantify is, so Quantify, the business that I run, represents the 4 areas of wellness that I feel are critical in our desire to thrive. So we're talking about physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional wellness. And so if there's a deficit in any one of them, we're not thriving, we're not living optimally. And so within that, it's a safe space, right? Because I'm known to cry at the drop of a dime. Like, this should be, well, cry like a man, right?
Cry like a man.
So, just a little backstory on Quantify. I was a child. I have a master's in social work, a master's in exercise science, and so I was a child and family therapist for some years. I worked as a social worker for our children and youth department. I worked as a hospital social worker. I was tired of the field of social work, right? I was burned out, right? I was giving so much of myself and I wasn't really seeing the reward within the work. And so I had made this decision to go back to school and get a master's in exercise science because I love strength and conditioning. I thought I was going to be the biggest man here, but, Jay showed up and messed up the plans that I had. So I just get... so instead of a medium shirt, I had to put a small one on now, you know what I mean? But I was ready to leave the field of social work. I got this degree. I was supposed to start working at Villanova University. This was right when they won their first national championship against University of North Carolina. Hopefully somebody is in here so you can feel that pain again. And so the day before I was supposed to start, which would have been May of 2016, I emailed the athletic director, and I said, I can't do this. I don't know what the reply was. I don't care what the reply was. Because 5 months earlier, January 2016, a young man by the name of Emmanuel Sloan in Philadelphia, 19 years of age, died by suicide by jumping in front of a train. And so I was in my bed. I was watching A Different World. I was looking at Philly.com, and I was reading the article, and that voice inside said, "Phil, it's time," right? Phil, it's time. You know that voice that's just nagging whether it's time to get up to go to work? All right, listen, your kids are nagging. You got to get up and see what they want right now. Are they going to keep going? But for me, it was, Phil, it's time to get out here and tell your story. I'm somebody that lives with depression and anxiety. You see these shirts that I've been wearing. I have some in the back. I'm selling them out the trunk. Feel free, $20 each. But at this point, I lived with depression and anxiety and suicidal ideations untreated for 15 years, despite me being in the field, right? Because it's easier to give advice than it is to take your own. And so with that, I finally got to a point where it was just like, I can't do this anymore. And this is typically when breakthroughs happen, when you're at your lowest. For me, I was at my lowest. I was tired of feeling suicidal 4 to 5 times a day. And so I started taking medication, right? And that quelled the suicidal thoughts. And so with the death of Emmanuel Sloan, I knew that I had to get out here and tell my story because I don't look like what America says mental health looks like. If I got to plug something else, my TEDx talk is called Black Mental Health Matters, right? Feel free to check it out, thank you. But it's the idea that, see, in America, when we think about mental health, we think about Kate Spade, Chester Bennington, right? We think about Donald Trump talking nonsensically on Twitter. But rarely is it somebody that looks like me, that looks like Jay, right? Because mental health has been whitewashed. When we look at articles about mental health, we see that rarely is it a person of color unless it's coming from us, right? And so I knew that I had to get it on this journey to tell this story, especially me being a black male. It's this idea of, I know what I needed when I was 13 now, when I was 17, when I was 25, when I was 31, what I need right now. And so within my work, that's what I have no choice but to do. I see the effects of unhealthy masculinity, quote unquote toxic masculinity. As I told these brothers, I hate that term, right? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about what makes a healthy person, right? And so what makes a healthy person are healthier ideals, right? So, and I see this so much in the work that I've done, especially amongst black boys and black men. I don't want them to be what I had to be for 15 to 20 years when we talk about living. I wasn't suffering, right? Because I think words matter. So they say, Phil, you got mental illness. No, I live with mental wellness issues, You're suffering from mental illness. No, no, I'm living with mental wellness issues.
Good.
It's just what it is, right? And so for me, it's a source of empowerment. It's a source of giving me perspective. Listen, I could get up here and talk forever. So I'm going to say, to answer your question, yes, I've seen it within my work. I've seen it within myself, where it has to start if we're going to have this conversation.
That's good, Phil.
By all means. You want something to add?
Man,
Drop my cards.
that was good, Phil. That was really good. And I think that's a great segue into being vulnerable. And what led me to get into my work and led me to begin to be open with my story. I come from a background of professional athletes, uncles, cousins, all played in the NFL. My dad had 7 brothers, and it was a lot of testosterone. That's what I grew up with, and my dad was a pastor. On the other side of it, my dad is a Baptist pastor, my mom is Pentecostal. Imagine that household. So on one end, you have an over-spiritual individual, and then you have a very traditional spiritual person, because Baptists don't believe in the Holy Spirit. Some of them, some have been reformed. And so my mom has 12 sisters. So I grew up around both, a lot of testosterone and a lot of estrogen. And what I saw this pattern that many of my uncles had outside children. I think all but one had at least 2 or more children with other women besides their wives. And I remember being 12 years old when my father first introduced us to our brother and our sister, and it was just so baffling. I was just like, huh? So I didn't understand that. And I watched my parents' marriage break down, and I watched them be a quote-unquote first family at church on Sunday, but Monday through Saturday, it was pure hell. And I saw that, and in my mind at 12 years old, being a very precocious kid, I'm like, something is not right, doesn't add up. I watched my father not come home on Fridays. Him and my mom worked the same job. They would go to work, but on Fridays, my father would take a different car, and he wouldn't come home till Sunday morning. Raising hell, get us up for church. We go to church. We praise God. We come home. Monday, it picks back up, and this went on for years. In my mind, I said to myself, this doesn't make sense. And how many of us have normalized dysfunction? Many of us have gotten to the place where we have learned to function in dysfunction, and so when something healthy comes along, it doesn't make sense to us. So many people thrive in chaos. So many people can't function in an order because they're so used to it has to be chaos in order for them to function. And I realized at a young age that this doesn't make sense. And so when my parents divorced, it put me on this path of depression. And of course, growing up in Mississippi, I didn't understand what depression was. You grew up in the South, they call it the Monday morning blues. They tell you to go work out. I never forget, I was visiting my cousin who played in the NFL at the time, and he was like, oh boy, you just need some sex. That's all that's wrong with you. I'm like, huh? Because it doesn't, but these are the dysfunctional patterns and behaviors that we have adopted to self-medicate. And this is where we are today as men. And to be honest, the only way that we can eliminate, and I agree with Phil, I don't like the term toxic masculinity, because by no means do I want a man to feel like we're trying to demonize male or being a man behavior, but as a society, there are some negative socialization norms that we have adopted in the masculine, in the premise of being a man, to where we have glamorized aggression, and there's nothing wrong with it. And what I realized is that I was substituting my anger, my resentment, and my bitterness on my father by playing football. Because football provided me this safe space. It provided me this outlet. And many of you, I'm sure, as men, you have outlets, whether healthy or unhealthy. And football was my outlet. And when football came to an end, because this was my coping mechanism, I no longer had the opportunity to be able to cope in this space where I felt free, and that's what led to the suicide attempts, because I did not feel valuable. I did not feel like I had purpose because football had become everything. And when I started to go into therapy and peeling back the layers, and I want to make sure I echo this to every man in this room today, I challenge you, go and visit the place that hurt you. Go back to that place. There's no amount of money, there's no amount of success, there's no amount of women, there's no amount of anything that can fix where you're hurting. And what we have done is we have adopted this Superman complex, and I'm going to take this from the great Alfred Edmond Jr., is he always says, is just because Superman can take a bullet doesn't mean that he has to. So we have adopted this mindset that we feel that we have to be strong. We have to be hard. Let me tell you something, that is tiring. So many black men are dying by suicide, depression, stress. And if we can really just be honest, let me tell you something. Don't let them fool you. There's strength in being vulnerable. You've got to be vulnerable. You can't receive from a broken heart and from a closed heart. And so many of us are walking around, we do well on our job, we make good money, but emotionally, we're unstable. We can give our wives sex, we can give them body, but we can't give them our emotions because we don't know how to really be active in that space. And until we are really given the opportunity, as every client, especially when young black males come in, they smile on their face. They be like, oh, bro, a black therapist. Because many of them have had a white female or a white male, and they say, Jay, I just don't feel that they can relate to me. And I've had so many young men, they start crying because I'll peel back them layers, and they'll stop. I said, no, let it flow. You need to cry. You need to release. There's a lot of grown males around here with boy issues. You grew up physically, but you did not grow up inwardly. And so until we begin to address those inner issues and really peel back those layers, we're going to continue to create these toxic patterns. Look at where we are today. I don't know if many of you saw the interview that Blueface, the rapper, did with the guy from of L.A., the DJ. And he said, how many women have you slept with in the past 6 months? Big boy. He said 1,000. He said 1,000. And he said, are you serious? He said, yeah, that's easy, 1,000. And so I commented, this was on the Shade Room, I commented, and probably about 1,500 people liked it, and I said, because you know why? We have glamorized that you haven't made it until you're at a place where you are wanted. And what happened is we have allowed things and the superficial of this world to substitute for the work that we won't do. Yep. Because now you think he would ever be able to love one woman? Hell no. Too many soul ties. Too many emotional connections that he's going to have to take probably 5 to 10 years to detox his soul. Because every time, and I'm going to take it there, every time we engage in sex and intercourse, you are entering into the course of someone's life. So you begin to take on their behavior. You begin to take on how they move and how they function. And this is why many of us as men can't be open and be responsive in relationships. Because we're tied and connected to so many different women, and the woman that really wants to love us, we put up a wall. Because until we are open to receiving, we can never be able to give.
Yeah. Well, preach, yo.
Yeah, right? He said
Right? Right? Let's get this brother a mic so he can drop it. So clearly, toxic masculinity is something that harms not just women, but men as well. I think we can all agree there. And it just looks a little bit different, right? For us, it looks and it manifests in a separation, a violent separation from our emotions almost. And for women, in sexual harassment, rape culture. But one thing that I've learned in doing this work is that black men in particular are probably the most sensitive species on the planet. We're just afraid of admitting that to ourselves.
Yes.
So I'm curious to hear from both of you, what is the importance of vulnerability for men, or for black men to be vulnerable, not just for themselves, but also for the relationships and the people in their lives? Why is that so important?
I think that's important, man, because it helps people to understand you. And Phil knows this as a therapist. You know, when we're trying to conceptualize a case, it's important on the intake that you provide us with much information as possible. Because in order for me to understand the behavior, I have to understand the root cause or the presenting issue, as we call it.
Yeah.
And so many times, I think in order to be vulnerable in a relationship and to be vulnerable amongst ourselves, because men, we'll talk about sports all day. Like that barbershop stuff, we'll do that all day. But you get to talking about daddy, uncle, we get quiet. And I think being vulnerable is just saying, man, listen, this is who I am, bro. And just really being okay with that. And many of us are afraid to be vulnerable because we don't want to be judged. We don't want to feel ridiculed. And we don't want to feel weak. And so I think being vulnerable it was phenomenal for me when I let go that, like, my dad hurt me. It hurt to look in the stands and not see him in the games. It hurt to see the things that he did to my mother. That hurt. Instead of putting on pads and trying to knock the hell out of somebody and thinking I'm going to feel better, because as soon as the game was over, guess what? That feeling came back of hurt. Because it was a temporary space, and I think vulnerability is so important, man, and I encourage you. If you can't be vulnerable with your wife, your spouse, your partner, or whomever, man, you're wasting time. And two, you're not giving yourself the opportunity to really connect. Because at this point with social media, we're over-commune, but we're under-connecting. Or should I say we're over-connecting and under-commune, because I'll show you that I got a good job, but once you get with me and you see all the ish that I got from my dad and from all of the brokenness, but I'll pay the bills, I'll have sex, but you start asking me, so what was your childhood like? I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah. I think, you know, he definitely made excellent points. I think about me personally, this idea of being vulnerable. You know, I let it all out. Clearly, you saw from my little opening rant, right? I have no problems with it, because it took me a while to recognize, and I had to ask myself, at what expense, right? At what expense am I not being vulnerable? We're talking about my happiness. We're talking about my ability to have a healthy friendships, healthy relationships, me being quote unquote successful in whatever career endeavors that I have, because I'm not truly allowing myself to just be, right? I'm allowed to be. I'm allowed to live. I'm taken back to the Nikki Giovanni, James Baldwin conversation. And you know, he's sitting there. She's like, you know, you go and you smile in the white man's face, right? And then I get the worst of you. And I was sitting there watching, and I was like, I dug it. I dug everything she was saying. And he was like, you know, I have to lie, right? I have to wear this mask because, as you said, the bills got to get paid, you know? And she's like, you know, I don't want you out there, I think she said, like, selling yourself. And he was like, I don't want you out there selling yourself. Right? So I will take the hit. I will take that bullet, right? So I can't be vulnerable. When we think about the historical perspective of why, as black men, we couldn't show up and be emotional, right? We think about slavery. We think about, even we know that that's not where the black man originated, right, in our story. And so we look at the evolution of that and how we've had to suppress our thoughts, our feelings, and our desires for family, for someone else. And so it's so critical. You know, I'm a Baldwin fanatic, you know, and he says, you know, to be black in America is to be in a constant state of rage, right? And I you know, I tweaked it a little bit. To be a black man in America is to be in a constant state of rage predicated on fear, right? And it's like, what's the fear? The fear of personal safety, right? I have to see people that look like me getting choked out, right? We just had a recent case within the last week over some marijuana, right? I'm afraid for my life when I go out of here, not for people that don't look like me, but by brothers who do look like me, right? So it's so many reasons with regards to fear as to why we operate, right? Our sense of worthiness.
Yeah.
We have to. I was talking to the good brother Ron Harvey last night. For so many of us, especially black men, we got to show and prove, right? We got to show and prove so then we can be deemed worthy. Because coming up, we didn't deem ourselves worthy.
No.
We didn't deem ourselves as being valuable. So we are going to sleep with women. We are going to sleep with men. We are without any type of emotional connection, right? Because we're trying to find this internal gratification and satisfaction, which is, it's not going to come without being introspective. I made a post yesterday on Instagram. Like I said, I'm plugging for days, right? Phil_quantify, that's Q, right? And so I made a post, and it's to challenge myself, because I'm all about challenging people. And it was like, you know, I hear so often now, we know that the buzzwords within mental health, you got to do the work, right? And I'm like, yo, it's so easy to say, do the work, right? But what we're talking about is we're talking about 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years that I've been living this way, that I've been surviving, because at the root of it all is survival, right? I have to survive, so I have to suppress, right? Because if I show any type of quote-unquote weakness or vulnerability, my life can be at stake. But it's so easy to say do the work, when I know for myself, right, I might meal prep for the week, but after day 3, that chicken and rice, like, right? So if I can't even meal prep, I'm just keeping it real, right? Yeah, y'all know how I get. You got to put the hot sauce in, you got to do extra, right? But if I can't even meal prep for 3 days, we asking somebody to undo 30 years of work, of things, how they learned how to be. Jennifer, the actress, phenomenal actress, Jennifer Lewis said, she was on the Breakfast Club, and she was like, you know, in my 20s, when I really started to understand my bipolar, or, you know, what I'm living with, she was like, I realized that it took me 27 years to get here. It might take me another 50 to undo this. And so I said, I'm a living example. Right? Yesterday, the soiree, I had to force myself to get out of bed to go to the soiree because I was having symptoms of depression. Now, thankfully, I know how to deal with it. So it's like, Phil, 6 o'clock, you need to get up, you need to get out, right? But everybody doesn't have that cognitive wherewithal. Everybody doesn't have that level of insight. And for me, and I know we're going to touch on it, it took me going to therapy. It took me going to therapy, again, the therapist, right? Because again, I knew I probably should have been going, and I've tried over the years. I've went to therapy 3 times, but so often we throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? So I went in my early 20s. The black woman, she was telling me about her clients. And I was like, yeah, I don't think you're supposed to be doing that, right? Instead of me saying, instead of me saying like, all right, you know what, this just is one. Let me find somebody else. I waited another 8, 9 years, right? We don't do that with McDonald's, or we don't do that with these places. We get an awful meal. The pizza place I ordered from last night, I'm probably going to order from them again, even though I didn't like it, right? But, you know, when it comes to my own wellness, I'm not giving myself that type of love and that type of care. And so my second therapist I went to, a beautiful Caucasian woman, she was wonderful, but she wasn't for me. She was like, oh, I understand. And I'm like, yeah, I understand why you behave that way. For me, I need pushback, right? I need you to challenge me. I can't let you, I can't allow you to allow me to continue to operate in this unhealthy space. So again, I waited another few years. And my last therapist, Dr. Val, I really knew what I wanted, right? So it was like, you know what, I couldn't deal with a black man, right? Because I don't know how to deal with black men, right? So I was telling a brother when we had our impromptu group the other night, I was like, it was a 70-year-old black man who comes to the men's group that I run bi-weekly. And he said, Phil, retired attorney Carlton, he's like, Phil, here go this book I bought for you. I want you to read this. I had no idea how to respond. Yes, I knew how to say thank you, but I never had an interaction with the 70-year-old black man. So I knew if I get into a therapeutic setting with another man that I'm not going to be able to emote because that's not how I've been conditioned, right? And so I knew I needed a black woman. I got an older black woman. She happened to be a lesbian that's married back when being a lesbian wasn't in vogue like it was. So I knew, and she knew the journey. And as soon as I walked in, I just started crying because I knew it was time for me to unburden myself because I deserve this, right? My daughter is 10. You know, I have a son who's 19. I have to be around. But before them, first and foremost, my first session with her, and this is to highlight this point, at the end of it, she was like, so you think you're going to come back? And I was like, yeah, I like you. You cool. I was like, you know, my daughter, she could benefit from a healthier me. You know, my son, him too. I could maybe have a healthier co-parenting relationship, right? My mom, she probably benefit. Work will go great. She's like, Phil, what about you? What you mean, what about me? Like, this is about you. This isn't about anybody else, right? And by you being well, mentally, emotionally well, being able to be vulnerable in this space, and when I'm vulnerable and I'm open and honest, from the time I went to see her after a breakup, right? I was in the unhealthiest relationships. God, and no shade. And she like, yo, when you go speak, because I might post it, why you always gotta say it was so unhealthy? I said, listen, because it was, right? But the beautiful thing is, she texted me the other day after I contacted T-Mobile to find out. I thought she was blocked, but she got through. And so she was like, Phil, you know, I'm starting to go to therapy. I'm like, it's a beautiful thing. But during that time, right, I wanted her back, or so I thought, because I was conditioned to love unhealthy relationships. And so I needed that familiarity, even if it was so much contempt in it. And so, you know, I downloaded the app. I was calling her from different numbers, you know, because I wanted to contact her. And see, I'm too open. I'm too vulnerable. And she was like, well, Phil, you're stalking her. And I said, no, I'm not in the bushes, right? But I had to sit back and say, and she said, no, you're a damn lie, right? My therapist said that straight to me. Like, no, you need to look at your behaviors and how unhealthy they are. And this is what I needed to find out in this journey. And so I get the pushback. She'll show me love, right? But more importantly, it's a space to be vulnerable so I can, again, not only live, but I can thrive.
Please. Yeah.
My bad. I'm sorry. Wait, this got to be 3 hours next year.
Phil say he wasn't in the bushes.
What? I got bad knees. I can't just be on this note, you know. Yeah,
but you was in them DMs.
Right. You both alluded to something that I want to crystallize for a moment, and that is the idea of self-love. We live in the black girl magic, black boy magic era, and I want to explore what that looks like because you both touched on it, but if you can illuminate that for us, what does self-love look like for black men?
I think for me, self-love looks like unconditional acceptance. So many times we talk about unconditional love, and let me just be honest. There's no such thing as unconditional love amongst human beings. That's only from God. Because let's be honest, we all have conditions on how we give and how we receive. But I think more importantly, unconditional acceptance within yourself, meaning that just because something happened to me doesn't make me this. I can accept that, but I don't have to accept the behavior or adopt the mindset that I am that. Like when clients come in to my office and quickly I let them know, it's like I'm not big on labels. So when they come in and says, hey, Jay, this is John Doe, 15 years old, depression, ADHD, those things. And I quickly tell them, I said, listen, I don't like labels because you have to be careful because you can take labels and adopt them and begin to wear them. And you become the label. I says, no, you are not the depression. You are an individual that's dealing with depression. So I make them become two entities, meaning that at some point you can do away with this. We can get you in a healthy space where you can manage. We can get you in a healthy space to where you can either learn the cognitive skills, as you talked about, Phil, and then be able to move forward and not only just survive, but as you end it, be able to thrive in life. Because I think many times we're so used to, especially with African Americans, because there's a lot of PTSD that we have. Not only just post-traumatic slave disorder, as I believe, but there's a lot of post-traumatic disorder that we've experienced in our own neighborhoods, in our own homes. And so what has happened, no one has never given us the space to really emote and to really talk about how we feel. So in order to understand what self-love is really breaking down and looking in the mirror and says, let me accept that this is who my father is, or this is who my mom is, this is why. And one of the things is that I had to understand is that when I got to that place, to one, accepting that my father cannot give me what he don't have. And I have to get to a place to where I can become a better son, that he may become a better father by accepting him for who he is. Because what he has to give is what he was given. Yep. And so what that does, it takes away your expectations. Because many times we have expectations for people to function and operate in a capacity in which they don't have the ability to do, and there we're disappointed. So what I had to do is stop expecting people to love me, and I had to begin to give it to myself. And when you're able to give it to yourself, to look in the mirror and say that I am worthy of that, one of the first things that I did, I had a white therapist, white guy. I kid you not, I wrote a paper on this in class. It happened just like the Antoine Fisher story. Where Denzel, the psychiatrist, and he came in every day, he didn't say anything, and literally we'd just sit there. And he was just like, all right, dude. And I was like, all right, man, I'll see you next week. So I never forget, I just like the movie, the third day, he says, why do you think you are a failure? And he said, give me 3 words that you feel and how you describe yourself. The first word I led with was inadequacy. And he said, man, that's scary. He said, why? He said, you went to the NFL. I said, but yeah, it didn't happen like I wanted to. But he's like, Jay, how many guys get there? I said, yeah. And I kept giving these excuses. And then all of a sudden, he started breaking that down, and we began to do the work because I could not accept that I had set out to do more than what my father did, because he missed out on his career because he got someone pregnant and he didn't move forward. And so I wanted to beat him out to show him. So I was putting so much energy in trying to be better than him than becoming better within myself. And so what happened was I wasn't loving myself. I was really hating myself because I had so much resentment and bitterness toward him. And just to move forward, when you get to a place like I had a conversation with the real king from Africa. And this is before I started writing my first book. And he was calling me king, and my mom had always called me king, and I was just kind of like, yeah, whatever. And the guy said to me, he said, I come to Africa, to America, and here's what I learned. You black men don't know who you are. And he said, ever since I was a little boy, my dad told me that I was a king. And so I'm sitting there writing this stuff down, and he says, you guys don't know who you are. And he says, when you become one with who you are, that is what you will project. So every time I have met a man here, I address him as king. When I met Alfred, it was king. Even to this day, and what I learned is that when you become one with yourself and begin to really love yourself as a human being, and I mean the flaws, your disadvantages, your deficits, your failures, your hurt, your pain, you gotta love all of that. We wanna love the good things about us. I remember talking to a lady and I asked, I said, tell me what's ugly about you. What you mean? Ain't nothing ugly about me. I said, no. And I said, not because I want to judge it, but so I can really understand all of you. Because if I just want to get the good of you, then I'm really missing out. Because the ugliness of who we are and where we come from is really what makes us become better. And that's a driving force to change, because what happened is that I don't like the ugliness. I hate it. And there's nothing, we look at the word hate as being a bad thing, but there's nothing more motivating than the word of hate. And I believe hate is the greatest motivation to changing something, to meaning that I don't like how I respond or act when I feel intimidated. And maybe it's not that that person's trying to intimidate you. Maybe you're insecure about some things that you have not worked on. And when I begin to love myself, I begin to see every black man as king. And I'll close with this, because what happened is, you said it, you had a difficult time accepting a book from the guy, right? As black men, and please, black queens, understand, it's hard for us to receive. We get so used to giving, whether it's providing, whether it's working. It's like somebody's always taking from us. So we have a difficult time receiving. So God placed on my heart, he says, for every mentor, every man come in your life, you always plant a seed. Just like, and I'm not trying to take us to church, but just like Abraham did with Melchizedek, he went with 10% of his tithe. Every time I go to see Alfred, whether I'm going to New York, I see him, I take him to dinner, I come with a gift. Because I want to sow into the soil that is helping me blossom into the man that I can be. But that starts with, you can't give from a place of hate. You can't give from a place that you are disappointed within yourself and you're insecure. So when I look at you, you taller, you bigger, you good looking guy. I don't feel some type of way. Or you make more money, I don't feel some type of way. I don't feel that I missed it. I'm looking at you like, man, do it, King.
So
Really quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, quick.
Okay, so I want to respond to what he said, because again, we're doing a lot of unlearning, right? We're doing a lot of unlearning. Full transparency. Y'all get the point already. When he got announced for 2019 BE Modern Man of the Year, a little bit of envy popped up, right? And I had to quell that. Bruh, no, chill. This brother is doing an amazing thing. As soon as he came off, it's like, yo, it's love. I wouldn't have been able to do that 2-3 years ago. I might have internalized that because not anything that you did, right? But we're so used to, especially as black men, operating out of a place of shame, right? We operate out of a place of shame, and it permeates itself in every relationship that we have, right? So I wouldn't have been able to enjoy this moment with you, right? And be excited for you because I'm still in this place of shame. And it's the work that we continue to do, right? When we talk about self-love.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you. I want to be conscious of time because I want to leave the balance of time for questions, but I have one more question for you guys. We talk a lot about the role of the women in our lives and the role that they have in helping us and creating safe spaces for us to be vulnerable. What are your thoughts on that? What role do women have as girlfriends, as wives, as mothers, as sisters to help create those safe spaces for us? Quickly, please.
I'm going to say this, right? So I wrote number 7. I had to get the cards out, right? Because this is so important because we do this so often, right? At the end of the day, man, this has nothing to do about black women, right? This is about, and I wrote, they can't create the safe space, but only reinforce what I've created individually, right? And then us as a collective, right? So whoever I'm dating at the time at this point, she can't create a safe space for me. Because if I don't have that within myself, and I know now that I'm not going to be dealing with anybody, right, where the space isn't safe. So I'd have more insight in the grown zone and watching Alfred and his lovely wife and the boys be up there listening, talking about what I won't accept at this point, right? So I don't even look at anybody to create a safe space for me. I create my own, right? And then whenever I come and we collaborate and create a collective space, and then we could go forward, right? But so, and definitely it's not to say it's right or wrong answer to it, but I know for me, because I don't want to put the onus on black women, that happens too much, right? And so I want to keep the focus on us and what we need to do tangibly in order to move forward.
Yeah.
And real quickly, I'm a bit biased because I think Alfred is amazing. If you're in a relationship, dating, marriage, and if you don't have the book, The Grown Zone, you're failing. Please go get that book. One of the best relationship books I've ever read. Him and Zara do an amazing job of really just detailing about relationship. And I'll say this for the women who may be single. Here's one of the things that we do as men. We will talk to men we respect, and we will open up to a woman that we trust. We have to trust you because many times we watch the interaction with other women, and what we do is we see how you do your girlfriends. If you put their business out on blast, we feel that, hey, if I show you this, what are you going to do with my information? And the one thing that we fear as men, we fear being open and you taking that and using it against us as a weapon.
Thanks.
And now all of a sudden, and I've seen this happen, and now all of a sudden, that's why your daddy did you like, and it's like, to the man, like and
Yeah.
I've seen this happen in interventions, and I'm like, no, don't do it. Because here's what happened. When you do that, he would shut down and never open up.
Yeah.
And guess what? He'll come home physically, but he has left you emotionally.
Yeah.
And he will continue to kind of, especially if you're married. And so if you're married, provide safe spaces to just listen. Provide that space that you want to where you don't want commentary. Most women, I got sisters and a mom. She called, hey, and she talked 30 minutes. I say 2 things. Okay, mama. All right, bye.
All right, let's keep it.
And the house is on fire and everything. I don't call no fire truck or nothing. She just wants somebody to listen. And many times women, believe it or not, our number one thing on the list, and you can go research this and Google this, is intimacy. Sex is second, but we want intimacy too. And intimacy is conversation and it's information.
Yeah.
And if you want true intimacy with us, provide a space where we can be open about the information that we're carrying. Yeah. And please don't wreck that space.
And now I know I said that to keep the focus on the man, right? But what popped in my head is hold me accountable, not hostage.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Hold me accountable for whatever is happening,
Well, guys,
but not hostage.
I know
Go ahead,
this
my bad.
we can be here forever, clearly, right? But it's about 10 minutes left. I want to open it up to questions. And if you can please commit to keeping your answers short. But we're going to be around if you want to engage in conversation with us throughout the day. So by all means, please, there are mics being passed around. So by all means, please ask your questions.
One right here.
We've got one up front.
Ready. What's up, brothers?
There you go.
Tremendous gratitude for your vulnerability here on stage. One of the things you've been really characterizing about vulnerability, you've been talking at length about that. Can you actually give us strategies and what vulnerability looks like in our day-to-day experiences with a variety of people? What does that look like? And when you're shamed about your vulnerability, how can you be shame resilient instead of shame resistant?
You take that, Phil?
Okay.
Oh, you take it.
What? Yeah, like pass up. So who that? Charles?
Yeah.
Come on, Charles. Don't do that, man. Don't do that. You know what what vulnerability looks like for people when we talk about strategies, it starts with self first and foremost, right? So one of the things that I do, again, we start our day operating from a place of shame. If the alarm goes off and we don't wake up, right, we start off in an emotional deficit. And so one of the things that I do as far as being vulnerable, I allow myself to feel. Right? I say literally to myself, it's okay to feel this way. Right now, I don't shut myself off. Other strategies that I do, I write about what I'm feeling. Right? I write down exactly what that emotion is that I'm experiencing at that moment in time. So then when I need to reflect on it, I can. When we talk about, shame and just the idea of shame, it's difficult to navigate, right? Because again, that comes from having an increased level of self-awareness, which we all swear we have until the rubber meets the road and we're in a place where shame operates. And so again, that's when we have to have that healthy self-talk, right? We need to remind ourselves, whatever full transparency. I've cheated in the past, right, in relationships because I didn't have insight into who I was. That's the reason I'm going with. And so... but keep it real, and I'm supposed to keep this quick. And that was with my daughter's mother for some years. I love her. That's one of my best friends, right? We just didn't work well together. But still to this day, I'm holding myself hostage, right? I'm still shaming myself for behaviors that have taken place. And so what I'm learning to do is say, listen, I'm detaching the person from the behavior. Right? And that takes intense therapy. That takes intense, quote unquote, work. Right, so I would love to say, it's some things that could take place day to day, but we're talking about the long game. And so for me, the long game is to say, find yourself a therapist. Feel free to go listen to my podcast, hashtag You Good Man, how to find a therapist when I break it down, because it's so important when we're talking about really learning, right? And learning ourselves, because you will never know how to navigate vulnerability and shame without knowledge of self.
Yeah, let me just add to that really quick. How many of us know who Brene Brown is? So Brene Brown has done extensive work on shame. And one of the things that she said that resonated with me is that if you put shame in a petri dish and you sprinkle vulnerability, it transforms into empathy. And it can't survive in that environment. So what that means to me is, and I think you alluded to it, Phil, is lean into that discomfort, lean into that shame, and vocalize that to the extent that it's possible. It's difficult for us to do things that we're not taught to do and are not used to doing. But if you can, to a certain extent, speak up and put words to your shame, you'd be surprised at the level of empathy that you get in return.
Just real quick, brief. You know, and when you talk about lean into it, it reminds me of what my therapist says. She says, Mr. Phil, you cognitively you have it, but I need you to feel what I'm saying, right? I need you to feel it in your gut, right? Because so often when these emotions come up related to shame, related to vulnerability, we're quick to go find something to replace it, right? To replace that uncomfortable feeling. And I promise you, sometimes you just got to sit with it, right? And it's uncomfortable and it hurts, but running to the gym, which I did for years, alcohol, which I did for years, right? It just suppresses it, right? And so once you allow yourself, and you're building resilience as you're going forward, allowing yourself to sit with that discomfort.
Yeah, you have something to add? Cool. Next question.
We're over here. Hey, Jay, Phil, State Senator Bobby Powell. My quick question, two-part question. Number one is everybody in here has somebody in our life who deals with a mental health issue, whether it be depression and anxiety, bipolar disorder, or something else. How do we, one, identify that and know when to help them seek treatment? And number two, I think each and every one of us is an episode away from mental health or mental illness crisis. How do we know that we're getting there, and when we're about to get there, seeking that treatment? Because when you talk about trust, Jay, me personally, and I'm elected, I don't feel comfortable or trust sitting across the table and sharing my feelings with somebody who is a non-person of color.
Yeah.
That's politically correct.
And that's and I think that's that makes a great deal of sense, because when I left my white therapist, I went to a black therapist, and they both worked for me, because one was more cognitive and the other one, he was like real spiritual, which is great. And he quoted a lot of scriptures, and I'm like, bruh, my dad a pastor, I don't need no more scriptures. Tell me what I need to do. You know what I'm saying? Give me some practical tools. And I think, when you're looking for a therapist, and this is why I got involved and wanted to become a therapist. And when I spoke for the NFL last year, I'm involved in the player engagement for when players leave the league. And the NFLPA vice president says, Jay, what can we do better? And I said, one of the things is providing us with opportunities to sit and talk with people that looks like us. And so they can have an understanding. So I think, and you should, really protect that space and protect that information. On the other end, how many of you are in jobs that are very stressful? Like, it's just a great deal of stress. And it doesn't mean like people are stressing you out, but you have deadlines. If you have deadlines, that's very stressful. It creates a lot of anxiety. And let's say even if you don't, and you have a relaxed job, I think everyone should have a therapist, counselor, someone that you can just go talk to, whether it's once every other week, whether it's twice, whatever you believe that, however you need. But we all need someone just to go and just sit down and just say, bruh, today was a rough one. Okay, what happened? This happened. And it goes back to talking about feeling. The month of March, I saw 75 people as clients. I'm not talking about Skype therapy, virtual. I'm talking about one-on-one. I almost lost my mind. And literally, and I told my therapist, and they asked me, says, how do you feel? And I said, he said, be honest. I said, I want to blow up this damn building. He says, okay, Jay, and if you blow up the building, then what? But you know what? It worked because it allowed me to feel that. Doesn't mean I was going to blow the building up, but this is just how I'm feeling. And then once he said, how would I feel? I was like, shoot, man, I'd probably sit here, wait on the laws to come get me. You know what I mean? Have to go upstate, do this time. And what it did was it allowed me to work through this process of debriefing. Because Monday through Friday, we carry so much. And you're right, we're all just one, issue, one disaster, one catastrophic event. Like we're all one time away. And so I encourage everyone, it doesn't mean something's wrong with you just because you have a therapist. It's just like we go to get wellness checkup. That's for your emotional and mental checkup.
Yeah.
It's to keep your headspace clear.
Yeah.
And for family members, I always suggest family interventions, because sometimes people who are dealing with the real mental disorders, the bipolar, schizophrenia, they're very, very defensive on those things because they require medication. And, really provide a space where, everyone in the family is involved in that, because now they don't feel attacked and they just feel like, okay, you want me to be better. And that's how I would go in trying to help a family member. But if you call them, hey, man, you need to go get checked out, bro, something wrong.
Yeah.
They become defensive.
Yeah, no, that's real. With regards to self, me being a therapist, sometimes we get caught up in the idea of, frequency, duration, intensity of what symptoms are you experiencing, right? Everybody like, yeah, I'm not gonna ask myself that, right? At the end of the day, I tell people, if I don't feel right, if you don't feel right, that's more than enough reason. You don't have to put a name to it, right? If you don't feel like yourself, if you don't feel as if you once did, and you start to see that it's becoming longer in duration, right? It's becoming longer. But if you just have that initial feeling of not feeling right, but I think what Jay was talking about was the idea of being preventative in nature, right? We want to go before we get to the point where we need the high blood pressure pills, right? So we want to go because, again, it feels good every time we have these conversations. We're able to talk with somebody. We're human, right? We connect. There's something about that interconnectedness. And so it's nothing beautiful, more beautiful than going to see somebody and just having an open conversation. They're not going to judge you, right? They're not going to view you in any specific way. And you could just be open and honest. As far as in dealing with family members or friends, it's about tact, for real, when the situations calls for it. Now, in some situations, when I was a hospital social worker, people, what should I do? They might be in crisis at that moment. I'm like, you just got to bring them in. Don't ask permission, ask forgiveness. Take them to your local crisis center and let the psychiatrist or what have you evaluate them if they're in dire need at this very moment, right? Because again, as I had an ex of mine, I had to end up going, because we can't assume that people, authority figures within these professions, doctors, police, or what have you, have the wherewithal to understand what to do in these situations. Make a long story shorter, I had to end up, after calling the cops, after calling mobile crisis in Philly, I'm from Philly, I had to go 45 minutes to go pick her up. She told me she took a whole bottle of cough medicine, take her to the hospital. The cops showed up at the end. Mobile crisis never showed up. In the hospital, the doctor said, because again, everybody's not well versed in mental health and what needs to take place. He was like, yeah, I think I'm going to release her. And so if it wasn't for my role in my profession, right, and me being able to tell him, well, no, this was a suicide attempt, right? We got the bottle right here. He ended up keeping her. But again, I didn't care about how she felt afterwards, right? She probably didn't already like me anyway because I was an ex, right? And so, but she was alive. I'd rather have her alive, being mad at me, because again, when we make these decisions, they're usually in haste, right? So, again, just approach with that tact and what have you. And the good doctor has a question up here. I want to make sure she gets noticed. I'm about to come give you my mic.
How y'all doing? Thank you for speaking today. I'm Reese Myrick with I Love You Daddy. My question is actually in regards to Philip. When you talked about when Jay just received that award and how you felt about that, it was more from a place of envy versus more being like congratulating him, like, or empowering him to want to do better. Now, I come from a household of athletes, right? So if I see someone win an award, that actually puts me in this competitive mindset to like, you know what, I like what he did, but how can I be better than him, right? Which actually encourages both of us, for Jay to do better and for me to do better for myself, right? But my question is, what are some healthier ways for others, I think, here in the audience, to talk to others about how to kind of switch that mindset, that way of thinking, from not really kind of trying to be somewhat of a hater for someone that wins an award, but more so congratulating this person, or internally and putting that within yourself to help you do better in probably whatever your field of expertise is.
Listen, I look at it as far as this situation. I didn't want to bring it up again, God, but you know what I mean? Because now I look like a jerk, right? Man, you was hating on him, right? No, but it's the idea
I
of.
say that. You say that.
It's something that I had to remind myself, right? So I'm 35. I keep it real. I'm a product of the hip-hop culture, of hip-hop generation, that teaches me and that has taught me that it's more about competition than it is about collaboration. And so this is something that I've ingested, whether it's through Jay-Z or whether it's through Master P or whether it's who these various people that I've listened to. This is something that we've internalized, right, as far as this idea of competition. And so, yes, I think a little bit of it is, I don't think things like jealousy and what have you are unhealthy, but it's at what point, at the point it becomes unhealthy, if I didn't catch myself in the moment and say, Phil, you're just as worthy, you're just as enough, right? And so I can stop myself and I can say, yo, congratulations, I'm happy for you. I'm sitting there recording them while he up there because I know it make good content for him, right? But again, it took this process, it took this journey, and it's a journey that I'm still on. It might be something else that Jason do later where I got to catch myself again, right? But again, I have this awareness. I'm just saying, I have this awareness. Man, I'm a hater. All right, I'm a hater. I'm a hater. All right. But it's this idea of how does it move you? You know what I mean? I'm motivated by these brothers. I take in this information, so I'm taking it and I'm reframing it, right? I'm reframing how my relationship with it, right? So I'm not going to go above and beyond to try and prove that I'm better than Jay. I'm just out here trying to be the best Phil that I can be. Right? And so that's truly what I have to remind myself. But like I said, Jay, I'm critical of hip-hop, if anybody ever have a conversation with me. Right? I have a love-hate relationship with it. Because I knew Jay-Z back when he was talking about, what's the difference between a 4-point, you know what I mean? And what, I ain't going to give you the bars. But, when the competition was heavy. And so during that time, I definitely couldn't look at him in this different light. But the more we mature, the more we have that self-awareness, we're able to approach it different. But again, we talk about self-awareness. You got to figure out who the hell you are out here.
And that's and just to interject, that's so important because I come from an athletic family as well, and I think what is important to what you said, figure out who you are. It's like when somebody comes to me and says, "Hey Jay, I want to write a book." The first thing I ask them, what is the book going to do for you? What is it that you want from it? So when you're looking at competition, right, you have to ask yourself, why are you competing? Who's keeping score? And if you win, who's going to recognize that you won? So you have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? For an example, I was in the league 13 years ago. I modeled 6-pack, 5% body fat when I modeled. I'm 37 now. That's not going to be who I am. And that's just the reality of it. So if I see a young guy in his 20s ripped up, I don't be like, put your shirt on. You know what I'm saying? To a place, because I know guys who are out of football or out of sports, and it's difficult. And for me, I've been mentoring 10 plus years. I'm the dude gonna be like, bro, you look good, boy. Keep it up, man. You know what I'm saying? Because I had my moment. And so what's important in this is to ask yourself, why do I need the win? Do I need to win externally? Do I need to win inwardly? Because to somebody who's received a lot of awards, and I go back and I look at it, I'm like, it doesn't mean anything. It's vanity. And there's nothing wrong with being competitive. I'm very competitive. But then again, you have to manage your competitive nature before it spills over into something else. Yeah. You know what I mean? So ask yourself, why am I competing? And who am I competing with? Is it with another man? Another woman? Because now I'll go even a step further. I hear, I'm on the speaking circuit with my girls' book, and I hear a lot of black women who have issues to where they feel like they have to compete with men. The man is intimidated by their success. And that's mind-boggling to me, because I'm like, why?
And part of it is the fact that the world is so much smaller now with social media, right? That's why I'm an advocate of not being a digital minimalist and not being on social media. Because if I see 100 posts of Jay day in and day out, and Jay out here, Jay over there, or I'm seeing Jason in Africa, I'm like, dang, I ain't been to Africa. Hater, right? But the fact is, we have to be mindful of what we're bringing in, because that's going to shade that's going to shade our perspective of not on other people but of self. Yeah. What the great poet activist Saul Williams said, we have to be mindful of our food, not just what we're eating, but what we're taking in. Right, because this is shaping how we view the world and how we view, especially as black men. We already weren't viewing each other in the best light, some of us, and so it makes that much worse.
Yeah. So we got time for one more question before we close up.
Sorry, you're gonna hold it. Okay, Janet, my heart is like so full, looking at every single one of you and what you represent. I wish every black man in America could be a part of this, and hopefully they will. You guys will spread this. But my question, I want to push you, Phil. You mentioned something about medication, but then not medication, and thought, can you talk about the resistance sometimes black men have to taking medication because bipolar, depression, schizophrenia, whatever, anxiety, medication works. And just talking about maybe your own resistance or experiences with medication and compliance, and how to get more of our men to agree to take medication.
Yeah. So I take 75 milligrams of Effexor. Did I take it today? I think I did. I take it every day. I've been taking it now for 3 years. I first started taking medication back in, I was about 23, 24. I didn't like the side effects, right? I never was one that had an issue with taking medication. I keep it real. It's like, well, you can't, it's big business, what have you. I said, listen, for me personally, I literally had 15 years, 4 or 5 times a day, feeling suicidal, being on 95, wanting to crash my car, which was a part of the depression and anxiety and perseverating on that thought of suicide. It just wouldn't leave my head. And it wasn't until I took the medication that it stopped cold turkey. And trust me, sometimes I try, like, I just want to hurt, and it just goes away, right? And so the resistance that, for a lot of us is really coming to grips with what we're living with, right? We're in denial in not only this area, but so many other areas in our life, right? So it only makes sense that we deny what can help us. And so, again, for me, it was different. A friend of mine, he came and said, Phil, listen, I think I got anxiety. I was like, listen, go to the doctor and try to work through or follow the regimen. He was like, oh, you want me to take medication? I'm not with it. I said, listen, brother, I got 15 years. I know what that felt like, right? I don't want to feel that no more. And so if this means I don't want to take medication for the rest of my life, but I'm cool if I have to, right? Because it means I won't have to feel that experience. And so, again, I don't just take medication just to take it. Always get a second opinion, a third opinion to make you feel comfortable, right? But, again, this is about the quality of life. We deserve, and again, you have to deem yourself worthy that you can have a life worth living and thriving in. Yeah. So I'm not sure if I really, answered the question per se, because it's a case-by-case basis. Everybody has their reasons, and especially everybody out here, whether it's a religious background, whether it's just the quote-unquote stigma that comes with it, people have their reasons. But I know for me it worked. And I know for people and clients that I've worked with that it worked, but definitely do your due diligence if it's something that you're considering.
Yeah.
I don't know if you.
So thank you, and this is a perfect segue to close, because you talked about this life intensity, and there's a formula that I abide by that is a function of love, work, and freedom, and those things combined lead to your life intensity, the degree of that life intensity. So what I would say in terms of giving you all a takeaway, because as men we need tactical steps to take forward, is give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to live vulnerably and live in your truest self and live in your most authentic self. And again, you'd be surprised at what you get in return. So please, thank you again. Put your hands together for Mr. Phil Roundtree and Jay Barnett. And thanks again to Black Enterprise. We're going to be around, so if you have any further questions, you can stop one of us on the way. So thanks again.
Hey, I got merch. Jay got books. We got merch and books.
I don't have
and
merch.
We're going to be over there.
Yeah.
And Jay, he going to be there. We're going to give him the money to hold.